I had no intention of ever telling this story. I thought that my wife and I would keep it just between ourselves. And I retired on January 1st, 2012, and we moved to Dallas because we have adult children here and grandchildren. So I love Vermont, but why stay there? I can be near my kids and grandkids. So yeah, here we are. But yeah, in October of that year, I had pain in my right knee. So I went to I get all my medical care from the Veterans Administration. So I went to the VA hospital. They X-rayed my knee, and when they did, they found two anomalies, one above my knee and one below my knee. And the one above my knee, um, the radiologist actually came down and looked at the X-rays, which is very uncommon. Normally, they throw your X-rays in a stack and they get read later. Um, but the radiologist was dumbfounded that he couldn't find a scar over where this thing was located, because he said, you can't violate the integrity of the skin and bury this thing that deep into fascia without there being a scar, and there is no scar. And the second thing that struck me was I was a runner for 40 years, and every time I would hit the 2 mile mark in my run, I mean, give or take 50 yards, that spot directly above where that object was located would go completely numb. I mean, you could stick a pin in it, and I could delineate the edges of it. It was perfectly round and about the size of a $50. Asked my doctor, what about this? She says, it's probably a histamic reaction. She said I wouldn't worry about it. So I didn't. But when I saw the X-rays, it struck me that this thing lay directly underneath what I called that numb spot when I was in my run. And it validated, 40 years of nightmares, that these things did actually put their hands on me. And that just kind of was a shove over the edge. I knew that for my own sanity and peace of mind, I needed to write about it. That at some level it was important. And I needed to tell people about it. So that was the catalyst to write the book.
Sure. And, going back to 1977, you're at, I believe, Whitman Air Force Base, correct?
Yes, Whiteman
Air Force Base. And just kind of a, in your words and however succinctly or briefly or however much you want to elaborate on this, what were the events that really prompted you to, write the book? And I know there's some things we can touch on before and after, but what was the main event that really, shook you to your core?
The main event was my abduction. A friend and I, a coworker, I was an enlisted guy. I was an NCO. I worked in the emergency room at Whiteman Air Force Base as a first responder and an EMT. And my friend I refer to as Toby, he and I worked together on the night shift for 3 years. And we were just kind of the perfect match. I mean, as far as people to work with. And it's unusual to find somebody you can work with that you can get along with. And he was kind of, he was just a good guy to work with. We were best of friends, and we were both married, living on base in NCO housing at the time. And our wives were best of friends. And on our off days, we'd barbecue, play cards, do something like that. So he came up to me in April of 1977 and asked, he says, "Hey man, I got a great idea. Let's go camping." And I'm like, "Camping? Are you nuts?" I said, "Look, I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. I know I've never been camping in my life. You're from Flint, Michigan, and I suspect you've never been camping in your life. So, what's this all about?" And, he had a pretty good argument organized in his head. And he said, "Look, he knew that I was an amateur photographer. I had a little dark room set up in my house at home. I had a nice new Yashica camera with a set of lenses and all the toys and stuff. And I really wanted to try them out. But when you live on a nuclear base, there's not a lot you can do with a camera." So he said, "Yeah," he says, "we can go down here and we can, you can photograph wildlife." And he wanted to just watch the night sky. He was just ate up with everything to do with cosmology, astronomy. Um, and he was really a gifted mathematician. Like me, he didn't have the money or the wherewithal to go to college right out of high school. So he was there for the same reason I was, to get the GI Bill. Um, he had taken some classes on basic physics and, aced them all. He was a smart kid. And I wish we'd have had time, and we had time together to discuss where his interest in the night sky, what was the origin of that, but we never had that conversation. So June came around and we went to Devil's Den State Park, which was a 6.5 hour drive south. And we had pre-planned to dodge the ranger station and try to find this plateau that this guy had told me about, right? So we're on a paved road. And in retrospect, what's really, really strange is it really seemed like my friend knew where to go. And we just happened to take the right paved road that led to a gravel road, which led to a dirt road with a chain across it, with a sternly worded sign that said, "Do not keep out, keep out, do not enter, no hunting, no camping, no nothing, stay out." And I said, "Well, I guess we're going to have to turn around and find another way." And my friend said, "No, wait a minute." And he was observant enough to see that what they'd done is just taken the lock and looped it around on itself with a padlock and draped it over the post on the opposing side of the road. So he says, "Man, I got this." And he hops out of the car, picks up the chain, lets it drop, and we're in, and we're thrilled. We're ecstatic. We feel like Lewis and Clark or something. So we drive on in, and we knew we were trespassing, but we thought we were in a nature preserve or something. I mean, what's the worst they could? We weren't going to leave a mess or hurt anything. What's the worst they can do? They can throw us out. We can live with that. So the problem that we had was this plateau, and I can send you pictures of it if I haven't already. The top of the plateau is even with the tops of the trees. So unless you're right up on the thing, you can't see it. A friend of mine, as a matter of fact, his story is featured in the second part of my second book, because he's an experiencer. He was also a US government cartographer. And he got some of the photos from Google Earth. And from the time we entered the park, we would have had to make something like 20 correct right or left turns to have hit this place, or we could have drove around for months and never found it. It's just a maze of little dirt back roads. So he was kind enough to map that out for me. I have a drawing that shows all the possibilities we could have gone wrong. And Toby chose the correct route every time. So that just belies credulity. I mean, I don't know how in the world but that's what happened. And I might mention too, real quick, I had never looked for this place on Google Earth because it should be covered with 40-year-old mature trees by now, and it's not. It's still chained off. It's still no admittance. It's owned by the Bureau of Land Management. It's owned by the federal government, on lease to some individual's name, but BLM is the owner. And the top of this plateau is still cut. It's clear cut. They take a tractor up there. I had a follower on Facebook who got a hold of the Google Earth images, and he blew them up. And he claims that he can see. He's a landscaper by trade. He says he can see clear tractor marks, that this thing is cut with what's called a brush hog pulled behind like a farm tractor. And it's clear cut to keep the growth of trees down. And from a satellite view looking down, the thing is roughly triangular shaped, which is kind of crazy. In my book, I refer to it as being horseshoe shaped, but that was before I knew it was still deforested. So I guess the question that hangs is, why would the United States government spend all that money and burn all that gas for 50 years to keep the top of a plateau deforested in the middle of nowhere? So, so we made our way to the top, and it was gorgeous. It was a beautiful place, and full of late blooming wildflowers and grass about knee high or less, and just a nice place. And we had camped off to the side near the tree line. And, we did all the fun stuff. I kind of cut through a lot of and get down to the event. After we did all the fun stuff, we had set up camp and we have a campfire between us. And my friend and I are sitting on the other side of on the other side of the campfire between us. And, we're just chatting. We're just kicked back and relaxed. And this was 9 o'clock at night. We probably had every reason to be a little tired, but we shouldn't have been sleepy because we were used to working the night shift. And I had noticed, and this sounds so cliche, I know, but this is true, that the sounds of the forest went silent. The crickets, the tree frogs, all that stuff. I mean, man, it was like being in a sound booth. Also, even the breeze that we had enjoyed earlier had stopped, and it was just still. And it unnerved me. I mean, had I been there by myself, I'd have been gone. But I wasn't going to do that. No, yeah, I wasn't going to do that. And I asked my friend, is this cool? Is this normal? And he blows it off. He's like, yeah, man, don't worry about it. It's nothing to worry about. The bugs, we just, we've been laughing and cutting up. They'll be back. Don't worry about the bugs. I'm like, okay. So I tried not to. And we have a little more just nonsense conversation. And I noticed that he's fixated on something to his left, which would have been to the left. And I am about to ask him, what are you looking at? When he says, hey, Terry, were those lights there before? And I knew there were no lights anywhere. I mean, we were in a remote location. It's built up a lot now, but the closest thing to us was the campsite. And we could maybe see a little glow on the horizon from the campsite, which was, tiny by today's standards. But there were no lights around us. We were in a remote area. And I couldn't see them at first. I had to stand up and take a step back because his torso was in the way, blocking the image. And I could see there were a bundle of these, or there were 3 stars in a tight little triangle. And they were sitting just above the horizon. And they were too far above the horizon to have been lights from a parking lot or a train or something like that. And we didn't know what they were. I thought it might be an airplane, headed directly in our direction, and we couldn't sense motion until it would deviate a degree or two. So we watched it for a while, and several minutes passed. It didn't move, and then it did. What it did was it rotated like it were on an axis, and it aligned the base of the pyramid or the triangle, parallel with the horizon. And then almost immediately started to move up. And it climbed up into the sky. And as it's climbing, it's the first time I felt this wave of calm wash over me. And it was a semi-sense of sedation. All that anxiety and unease that I felt earlier because of the place going so silent, that was all gone. And I was in a strange place. I don't know. Our emotions were inappropriate. They were muted. We should have had some level of anxiety or curiosity or something, but we didn't. I felt this mild disinterest and absolute calm. I felt more like an observer than a participant in what was going on. I felt detached, dissociated in some way, and we watched until this thing reached the ceiling, and I have no idea what that was. I had no point of reference. I would guess, 10 or 15,000 feet. And as it's climbing into the air, it did some somersault movements where the apex would turn down under and the thing would do a somersault. And I remember the distinct feeling that, this thing is moving with purpose. It's not out of control. It's moving with purpose. And it was. And it was clearly headed in our direction. And it was kind of what I call, once it reached the ceiling, it moved down and came down like on a glide plane almost. We never heard any noise. the lights on the triangle on the points dimmed somewhat, and it kind of just slid in over the forest, and we're looking at the treetops from our elevated position, and it glided in at about 5,000 feet on the horizon, and then steadily declined or descended until it was at about 3,000 feet over the top of the plateau. And it slowed and came to a stop directly over the plateau. And had we camped where I wanted to set up camp right in the middle of the plateau. And if we'd done that, this thing would have been right over our heads. And Toby was insistent that we set up camp by the tree line, which was good fortune because then we were offset from it a bit. And it was enormous. And I don't understand to this day how this thing could not be seen in 3 counties. I mean, granted, in 1977, it was sparsely populated, but I mean, this thing was big. I say in the book that it was a city block on each length of the triangle. And, you know, I would compare it to like a super Walmart. I mean, it was just enormous and it was intimidating. But we didn't feel intimidated. We felt just neutral. And we sat there, and you know, there's hardly a word said between us. I mean, I think I remember the only words that Toby said was, they're really moving now, in reference to the 3 points of light when it started to move up into the air. But after that, I don't recall any conversation. And once it's stopped, from underneath and from the center, a light came out of it. And it was about the diameter of a softball, maybe a little bigger, but it was a column of white light. And it was the same character as like a high power searchlight cuts through fog. You can see a visible white light. Of course, there was no fog, but that's the illusion that it gave. It had a visible quality to it. And it landed right in the middle of our campfire and stayed there for about 60 seconds and then turned off. And the second that it turned off, another light came on, just like someone hit a switch. And this was a laser-like thing. I had only seen lasers on TV in 1977, but I knew that's what this was. And it would land at a spot at the campsite and stay there for maybe 1/10 of a second, and then reappear in another spot, so that every second it would be in 10 different locations all over the campsite. So it gave the illusion this light was dancing all over the campsite. But its focus was on everything that Toby or I, or that we brought with us, like the car, the tent, the campfire, the cooler, his backpack, us personally. The light struck me in the chest at least twice. I never felt a thing, never heard a thing. And that lasted for maybe 3 minutes. And then I had this wave of, that mild sedation kind of morphed into sleepy. And I felt, if you've ever been in a situation where all you want to do is lie down and go to sleep, that's what I was. That's where we both were at. And my friend picked up his air mattress and he said, "Show's over." And I thought that was interesting. I didn't answer him. And he went over to our little, $10 Kmart pup tent and threw his air mattress inside and hopped on top of it. And I followed him and did the same. I threw my mattress in and fell on top of it. And I was out. The second my head hit the inflatable air mattress pillow, and I was gone. I had no dreams. It was very much like being under the influence of anesthesia, in that it was just black, and then all of a sudden, yep, exactly. And I wake up, and there are these lights flashing through the tent that are yellow and greenish and white. And they are at odd intervals, and they would flash really bright, like an old school flash bulb from a camera. And when they would flash, they would light up the inside of that tent for a millisecond. So they were very bright. And I wake up and I don't have my wits about me. I'm kind of, where am I? Oh yeah, we're camping. Yeah, Toby and I are camping. And I'm seeing these lights flash and I'm thinking, these must be the overhead flashers of a park ranger's truck there to kick us out. That made sense. And I sat up and I noted that my boots had been unlaced about 3/4 of the way down. Now, one of the things they teach you in the military is to take care of your feet, and I do to this day. I mean, I would never have done that. I would have taken my boots off. I kept them laced to the top, but I would not have done that, because if something happened and you needed to run, it would be a trip hazard. And I wouldn't do that. And that confused me. It didn't scare me, but it confused me. And I took them off and I put them on properly. And I noticed that my socks were on sideways. And I would never have done that. But it didn't dawn on me that someone had redressed me until later. And I get my boots laced and I turn my attention to Toby. And I could see in this flash of white light, Toby was African American. And the saline in his tears down his side of his cheek would fluoresce against his dark skin whenever that light would flash through the tent. So I could see he'd been crying. And that unnerved me. And that really started to get me anxious because I could not imagine what would make this man cry.